The evening sun hung low over the wide Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and dusty red. A lone cowboy rode his tired horse along a narrow trail that followed the Rio Grande River. The sound of slow hooves mixed with the steady flow of water, creating a quiet rhythm in the air. He had been riding all day, searching for a missing herd, when something unusual caught his eye near the riverbank. At first, he thought it was just a pile of old cloth lying on the rocks. But as he came closer, he realized it was a woman. She was kneeling beside the river, beating wet clothes against flat stones. Her movements were tired and mechanical, like her body was working but her spirit was far away. The dress she wore was torn badly, ripped at the sleeves and bottom, as if it had fought against thorns and sharp branches. Dirt stained the fabric, and parts of it barely covered her skin. Her long black hair hung loose and messy down her back, shining slightly in the sunlight. The cowboy slowed his horse and stopped a few feet away from the bushes. He did not want to scare her. He had seen Apache women before, usually strong and proud in colorful clothing. But this woman looked nothing like that. She looked like someone who had been running from something terrible. As if sensing that she was not alone, the woman suddenly stopped washing. She lifted her head slowly, her wet hands freezing in the river water. Her dark eyes met his. Fear filled her face instantly. She stood up quickly, gripping the torn edges of her dress, trying to cover herself. For a moment, both of them just stared at each other. The cowboy's heart began to pound loudly in his chest. Every story he had heard about Apache warriors rushed through his mind. He was alone, no gun in hand, no one to help if things went wrong. But then he saw something in her eyes that changed everything. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was pure exhaustion. Her face was thin, her skin dusty from travel. There were dark shadows beneath her eyes, marks of sleepless nights, of hunger, of fear. She did not look like someone ready to fight. She looked like someone who had already fought and lost. The cowboy slowly raised both hands to show he wasn't dangerous. His voice came out quieter than he expected. "I won't hurt you," he said. She didn't answer. The river flowed loudly between them, silently acting as a shield, as if it knew she did not feel safe yet. The cowboy took a careful step back. Then another. He did not want to be just another threat in her life. In that quiet moment, with the red sun sinking behind them and the river whispering secrets, the cowboy realized this was not an ordinary meeting. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The woman did not run. That alone surprised the cowboy. Most people, especially those who feared him, would have already disappeared into the trees. But she stayed by the river, standing still like a wounded deer unsure whether the hunter would strike or turn away. The torn cloth of her dress fluttered slightly in the breeze, and she held it tightly with trembling fingers. The cowboy kept his hands raised and spoke again, slower this time. "I'm not your enemy." His voice was gentle, different from the rough tone he usually used with men and cattle. Still, she did not respond. Her eyes studied his face like she was searching for truth inside a stranger. He took another step backward, letting the distance between them grow. Then he carefully removed his brown leather jacket. It was old, dust-stained, and smelled faintly of horse and smoke, but it was warm and strong. Instead of walking toward her, he placed it on a flat rock several feet away and stepped back again. He lowered his head in a small sign of respect. For a moment, nothing happened. The river flowed. The wind whispered through tall grass. A bird cried somewhere in the distance. Then she moved, slowly, like someone afraid the world might break if she moved too fast. She walked toward the jacket, every step cautious. When her fingers touched the leather, she flinched as though expecting pain. When none came, she wrapped it around her shoulders with shaky hands. The cowboy exhaled quietly. He hadn't realized how tense he was until that moment. He sat down on a dry log near his horse but kept a respectful distance. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small bundle of dried bread and a tin cup. He walked a few steps forward, placed them near the rock, and again retreated. The woman stared at the food like it was a dream. Her stomach betrayed her with a low, empty growl. Her shoulders dropped in shame, but hunger was stronger than pride. She picked up the bread and smelled it like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she took a small bite. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She chewed slowly, carefully, like each piece mattered. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Her English was broken and weak, but the words carried more power than a shout. The cowboy nodded. "You're welcome." Her voice trembled as she spoke again. You, not soldier. He shook his head. Just a cowboy. She seemed to relax slightly at the word. As if soldiers were ghosts she wanted to forget. She drank from the cup, then looked up at him again. Her fear had not vanished, but it had softened. He noticed then the thin scars on her arms, half hidden beneath the jacket. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old enough to forget either. He did not ask about them. Some stories did not need words. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in gold and fire. Silence returned between them, but it was no longer sharp. It was gentle. For the first time in a long while, she was not alone. And for the first time, the cowboy felt that his path had been quietly changed by a stranger beside a river. Night began to slide slowly across the Texas sky, turning the warm gold of evening into deep shades of purple and blue. Tiny insects danced over the water like floating sparks, and the river whispered softly in the growing darkness. The Apache woman sat quietly on a rock near the shore, wrapped in the cowboy's jacket. It hung loosely on her small frame, but the warmth felt strange and comforting, like something she had forgotten how to trust. The cowboy stood near his horse, giving her space, watching the horizon as if danger might rise from it at any moment. He had learned long ago that trouble often arrived quietly. Tonight, however, the only thing moving was the wind. Finally, she spoke again. My name, Ayanna. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to be heard over the river. He turned toward her and adjusted his hat respectfully. I'm James, he said. James Carter. She repeated his name softly, like she was testing each sound carefully, afraid it might break. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. It was not the sharp silence of fear. It was slow and thoughtful. Like two people standing at the edge of an unknown bridge. Ayanna stared into the water for a long moment before speaking. My people, they gone. James did not interrupt. She swallowed. Soldiers come night. Fire. Guns. Screaming. Her hands clenched around the jacket. I run. I look for my mother. Her voice stopped. Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. I not find her. Her words fell into the dark like stones in water. James felt something twist painfully inside his chest. He had seen war from far away, heard stories, passed burned villages, met men with haunted eyes. But hearing it from her made it real. In a way no gunshot ever could. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She nodded slowly, staring at the ground. I hide in forest. No food. No sleep. She lifted her arm slightly, showing scratches and faded bruises. Dress catch. Tear. Her voice cracked. I think I die. But you didn't, James said gently. You're here. She looked up at him with surprise, like no one had ever said that to her before. You're alive, Ayanna. The words seemed to enter her like warmth. For a moment, there was only breathing and river sounds again. Then James stood up. He removed a small blanket from his saddle and laid it near the fireless ground between them. It's going to be cold tonight. Use this. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, James. He backed away again, toward his horse. You can sleep here, he said. I'll keep watch. Ayanna lay carefully on the blanket, the jacket still tight around her. She looked up at the stars, endless and bright. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, her eyes closed without fear. James sat a few feet away, staring into the night. He did not know why fate had brought them together. He only knew one thing. He would not let anything hurt her again. Not if he could help it. Dawn arrived quietly over the river, spreading pale light through the trees and waking the world with birdsong. James rose from the hard ground where he had dozed upright against a log, one hand resting near his rifle. When he stretched, his bones ached, but his eyes went first to the blanket. Ayanna was still asleep. For a moment, he simply watched, relieved. The pain in her face had softened in sleep, no longer sharpened by fear. The jacket covered her like a shield, and her black hair spilled across the blanket like a dark river of its own. He moved carefully and walked toward his horse, pulling out a small pan, some dried meat, and coffee beans. He struck a match and built a gentle fire. The crackle of burning wood mixed with the fresh morning air. When the smell of cooking reached her, Ayanna stirred. She sat up slowly, blinking in the strange light, then pulled the jacket tighter when she remembered where she was. You're safe, James said softly. Good morning. She glanced around, confused for a second, then nodded. Morning, she replied quietly. James handed her a cup of warm water first. Drink slow. She obeyed. He then gave her a small piece of cooked meat and bread. She ate politely, not rushing, but every bite told of hunger she tried to hide. When she finished, she looked up at him hesitantly. "Where I go now?" The question was small, but it carried a mountain behind it. James leaned against a rock and thought carefully. "I've got a cabin west of here," he said. "Not fancy. Just wood and quiet. No soldiers. No trouble." He paused. "You can stay there. As long as you want." Ayanna stared at him. "You, help me?" she asked. He nodded once. "Yes." Tears filled her eyes instantly, but she forced them back. "I not want cause problem," she said. "You won't," he replied. "I promise." She studied his face like she was memorizing it, searching for lies. Then she whispered, "Okay." Her voice was trembling, but hopeful. James helped her to her feet. When she stood, she wobbled slightly. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough in case she fell. She took one careful step, then another. They began to walk beside the river. Along the path, Ayanna stopped suddenly. She bent near the water and picked something up. It was a small necklace made of stone beads. "I dropped yesterday," she said softly. "From Mother." She pressed it against her heart. James said nothing. Some things were sacred. As they walked, the land slowly changed. The ground grew softer, the trees thicker. Birds flew from branch to branch. Ayanna looked around like a child seeing the world again for the first time. "You not fear Apache?" she asked carefully. James glanced at her. "I don't fear good people." She smiled faintly. It was the first real smile he had seen from her. And it felt like sunrise in his chest. They walked in silence after that. But it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of healing beginning. The cabin appeared in the distance as the sun climbed higher, peeking through tall pines like a hidden treasure. It was small, made of weathered logs and a stone chimney that had not seen smoke in a while. James slowed his horse and gestured for Ayanna to stay behind him. "We're almost there," he said softly. Ayanna hesitated. The closer they got, the more memories of running, hiding, and loss pressed on her chest. She kept the jacket tight around herself and clutched her mother's bead necklace. "Is safe?" she asked quietly, voice trembling. "Yes," James reassured her. "I've stayed here alone for weeks. No soldiers. No one to harm you." She nodded, but fear lingered in her eyes. He could see it. Even in a cabin that promised safety, the past clung to her like shadows at dusk. They reached the door, and James pushed it open. Inside, dust covered the wooden floor, and a small fireplace sat cold against the far wall. A few shelves lined the walls, holding old tins, books, and tools. It was simple, but it was home. "Here," James said, laying down a small bundle of fresh clothes he had packed in his saddlebag. "You can change. They're clean." Ayanna took the bundle cautiously, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you," she whispered. James shrugged. "Just trying to help." She moved toward the corner of the cabin, unwrapping the clothing with careful, deliberate movements. He gave her privacy, leaning against the doorway silently, keeping watch outside as well. When she emerged, she was dressed in a simple, clean dress that reached her ankles. Her hair was still messy, but her face glowed faintly with relief. "Better," she said softly, almost to herself. James nodded. "Much better." They sat together on the floor, a few feet apart, sharing a small meal. For the first time in weeks, Ayanna spoke without fear. She told James about the village before the attack, stories of laughter, children running barefoot, and nights by the fire. Her voice shook at times, but it was alive, filled with memories she had thought lost forever. James listened quietly, never interrupting. He could see how her spirit had been battered, how her trust had been broken. But sitting there, in the quiet cabin with food in her stomach and warmth in her heart, he realized something. She was beginning to heal. After a while, she paused, staring at the fireless hearth. "I feel safe," she admitted softly. Her words were fragile, but genuine. James smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and something deeper stirring inside him. "Good," he said. "You deserve that." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. A bird called in the distance. For the first time in a long while, the world felt quiet in a way that was comforting, not threatening. Ayanna leaned back against the wall, tired but at ease. James stayed nearby, keeping watch as promised, his hand resting lightly on the rifle at his side. He knew that the danger wasn't completely gone, but at least for now, she was safe. And in that moment, he realized something important: some meetings weren't by chance. Some paths crossed for reasons the heart might not understand immediately, but in the quiet of that cabin, beside a river and beneath the endless Texas sky, two lives began to stitch themselves back together. Night settled gently over the cabin, and the river outside murmured softly under the silver light of the moon. Inside, a small fire crackled faintly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Ayanna sat on the blanket near the fire, her knees drawn close to her chest. The jacket James had given her earlier was now wrapped snugly around her shoulders, and the small bead necklace from her mother rested safely in her palm. James sat a few feet away, leaning against the doorway, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. But tonight, there was none. The wind whispered through the pines, the only sound besides the river and the occasional hoot of an owl. For the first time in weeks, Ayanna felt a strange sense of calm. It was fragile, almost unfamiliar, but it was there. "You, sleep now?" James asked quietly, careful not to startle her. Ayanna nodded. "Yes, I think I can." Her voice was soft, tentative, but it carried a weight that made him pause. She had survived so much, and now even rest seemed like a gift. "Good," he replied. "I'll keep watch." She closed her eyes, but not immediately. Instead, she traced the small beads in her hand, remembering her mother's voice, the laughter of her village, the warmth she had almost forgotten. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it was not of fear or grief, it was relief. Relief that she had survived, that she was safe, that someone cared enough to guide her through the darkness. James looked at her and felt something shift inside him. He had always been a wanderer, a cowboy drifting from one place to another, carrying little more than his horse, his rifle, and his solitude. But now, in the quiet of this cabin, he realized he had found something he didn't know he was missing: purpose. Protecting her, guiding her, offering small kindnesses, it mattered. Hours passed in silence, gentle and unbroken. Outside, stars scattered across the sky, brilliant and countless. Ayanna slept finally, curled in the blanket with the jacket around her. Her breathing was steady, her face relaxed for the first time in weeks. James remained awake, his gaze moving from the river to the cabin's small window. He thought of all the hardships she had endured and all the nights she had run, alone and afraid. And yet, here she was. Alive, unbroken, in ways that mattered most. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight touched the cabin walls. Ayanna stirred slightly but did not wake fully. James smiled faintly. The new day promised safety, warmth, and a chance to begin again. The torn dress, the long flight through forests and rivers, the fear and hunger, they were behind her. He knew that tomorrow would not erase her past. But it could mark the start of something better. And in that quiet moment, with the fire flickering low, the river flowing steadily, and the stars fading above, James understood the truth. Some meetings were meant to heal, not harm. Ayanna would survive. She would live. And perhaps, in time, she would find laughter again, the simple joy of trust restored. And as for James, he would remain by her side, silently guarding, quietly supporting, and witnessing the fragile, beautiful rebirth of a soul that had been lost, and now, was found. The river whispered. The cabin was warm. And somewhere between the past and the future, two lives stitched themselves together with courage, care, and hope. The night ended. A new day began.